I have it too. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our this week's Campfire chat, and it's with Joanna Nadin. I'm so excited to speak to you. I've loved reading Birdy Arbuthnot's Year of Yes. And so we're going to be talking today. So we'll probably just give a couple of minutes for a couple of people to join us. Hiya, hi Tish. Yeah, we've got some people joining, so let's give them a minute. So nice to have you here with us. We're really excited to speak to you.
I'm now feeling terribly embarrassed about my technical setup. You look all glowy and lovely, and I look haggard and tired, and I need a better ring light.
Honestly, though, it's like I'm hope you're gonna slowly see me go darker here as the window as it gets dark. So at the moment, the lighting is not too bad. I haven't got a ring light actually, but yes. Anyway, that's enough about my lighting situation. That's not what we're here to talk about. I'm so excited that we are here with Carnegie nominated bestselling author Joanna Nadin. Yes, I will say it like that. And so to start us off, for those of us who haven't read Year of Yes yet, could you give us your maybe slightly longer elevator pitch?
So I tried to come up with an elevator pitch. I'm notoriously bad because I'm too wordy. And then I thought I'm just going to read the blurb on the back because someone else has done a brilliant elevator pitch for me. This is the blurb on the back of the book.
I love that.
1960 is knocking on the door. An 18-year-old Margaret Birdy Arbuthnot, presently of Surbiton, wants more than her current existence in the dull suburbs. She wants to live in capital letters. Could Soho, with its bright lights and dark corridors, hold the key to a life more lover-like and less Surrey, even if Mummy thinks it's a square mile of vice full of men with overly shiny shoes?
I love it. Honestly, I literally read this in a day or so. And what I really found intriguing is this is an I can never say it, epistolary novel. So basically it's Birdy's diary. And so we see everything 100% through Birdy's lens. It's completely what she has decided to put on paper. And I really enjoyed her narration, but I also loved the hints at the things that she didn't quite want to put in this diary. So how did you find writing Birdy as the only and perhaps not always 100% honest with herself narrator?
Oh, it's and incredibly difficult when you are. I was dealing with a narrator who was effectively me at that age, who I was desperate to have a life far more exciting than mine. And it wasn't the suburbs, but it was a very small Essex market town. And I was in absolute denial about my own foibles and my own background. And so I suppose in a way I tried to remember what that felt like. So trying to give an accurate portrayal of stuff going on around me whilst being very aware that it's filtered through these very narrow eyes of an 18-year-old who has been stuck in the suburbs and hasn't lived a very exciting life, and having her not be having to show the reader that she's not aware of these things as well it's quite a feat. But I have spent 20 years effectively writing me in various forms in books, so I've learned how to do it now.
So did it feel like a different facet of yourself that you got to explore in this book?
Yeah, I mean, this is why I write most. It's why I write at all, actually, because I did have a very boring life growing up in a very dull market town in Essex, and I spent my childhood, teenagedom, in for adult life trying to live a life less ordinary. And I didn't set out to be a writer. I just wanted a life that would be book worthy, that would be exciting somehow. And so I ended up doing all these jobs. Like, I worked in telly, I worked in radio, I worked in Downing Street, and I did all of these jobs because I thought they would give me this exciting life. And in all of them, I've just ended up being the person in the back room doing all the writing. And it was in a sort of epiphanic the basement of Downing Street when I realised that my life was never going to be like a book, but I could instead, if I wrote books, then I could imagine myself into these different places. And for me, that's what Birdy was. It was a chance to go and live in the late 1950s, early 1960s, and to live in Soho, which is just this magical place. I mean, it's very different now. It's much more corporate now.
Yeah.
But when I first moved to London, it still had a slight edge to it, and it has this sort of decaying glamour to it.
Yeah. The pizzazz was still there, but maybe fading a little bit.
But yeah.
Yeah. And so we already talked about like Birdy as being your protagonist. She goes through a massive transformation in the novel. Like we see her at first, but she is really sheltered and she's very naive and she's longing, as you say, to like live. And she's very much at that point like rejecting her life in the suburbs and rejecting the way she was brought up. But by the end of the novel, I feel like, without trying to spoil anything, I feel like she's really found herself, and she's also accepted not just like the life she's living, but also maybe some of the things that she didn't expect to accept about herself, like parts of her upbringing and how she finds kind of solace in some of those things. So how did you go about planning her journey and planning her arc for this book?
It's really interesting because I often write about people escaping their boring lower middle class roots, because that was sort of my life. And so I was really clear on the sort of the journey into Soho and what would happen in Soho. But as I was writing, I came to understand a lot more. I've studied and academically studied class as a concept as well. And I've been doing a lot of work on that. And the more I was working on it, the more I felt I had to do her upbringing justice and not demonize her parents for being what she saw as boring, and what I certainly saw as boring growing up. And so actually that side of the story, the acceptance, only came as I was writing the novel. And I'm a real planner, and I'll talk about this later possibly, but I don't start writing at all until I have planned every, and in this case it wasn't done by chapter, it was done by month. So every month of the year was perfectly planned out. But in none of that was Birdy's acceptance of Surbiton. And so what I had to do was, then I realized she needed to go home once a month. She needed to have this monthly arranged Sunday lunch.
Yeah.
So that we could see that part of her journey too. So that was a really late add-on.
And I really like that. I like that even though she's having this exciting new life in Soho, there's that grounding still and that link to who she starts out with. Because I think part of that, I think the contrast is really important for her as a character, because you really, I think her reflecting on that as well and how it's different and how she then wants to have her life actually is such like a relatable part of the story, because we're always going to compare to our past selves, right? So that was such a like really relatable part. And talking about her life in Soho and how she kind of lives her life, that she amasses a glorious found family, which honestly it's one of my favorite tropes of all time. Like anytime there's found family, I'm like, I'm here for it. So are any of the characters based on real life people, and did you have any favorites to write from this glorious bunch of people?
Oh, that's a really good question. So I did a huge amount of research into Soho in that year, in 1959 and 1960. And there are wonderfully a plethora of books about the famous people, and many of them are still alive and still talking about life in Soho. So there are cameos in the book from Francis Bacon is in there, Lucian Freud is in there. There are characters who are the two Roberts, and Damien Barr has just actually written a novel about the two Roberts, these two men called Robert. So there are real characters in there, but the actual my main cast, so Birdy herself, and then all the Mannerings from Calamity of Mannerings who make an appearance, they are pure imagination. They are amalgamations of people I know or wish I knew, really. So no, they are not real. But because I can't write until I've cast everyone, like given them imagined who would play them in a film. So they are all actually, they're sort of based on real people in the sense that Rollo, who was my favourite character to write, and I love Rollo so much, is Ben Whishaw. And I only ever see him now as...
Okay. Cannot unsee that now.
No.
That's wonderful.
Oh, I love him.
Okay, so apart from like the kind of based in like Soho, and obviously you've done a lot of research, but there are also some fun nods to your own life in the book. I mean, it was kind of funny because I was like researching for like our interview, and then literally Birdy's immediate no to the possibility of like going to uni in Hull made me laugh so much, because I was like, ah. And the setting feels so vibrant, you know? The setting of Soho feels very vibrant and lived in, and you can like taste it. So how do you balance like the fact and the fiction when you're writing historical YA?
It's really hard to do in the sense, I mean, because I did do so much research for this, but then it's how you wear it lightly rather than littering the book with. Yeah. So there are a couple of sections where, right at the beginning, where Birdy, when she first moves to Soho, where her first entry in the diary, once she's got to Soho, she decides to capture it, and because she's trying to be like Cassandra Mortmain and I capture the castle, so she's that, and that was my device for allowing her to describe exactly what Soho was like in the 1960s. So it was, I snuck it in. I mean, otherwise it would just sound like an info dump, basically. But there was a way of doing it which felt slightly more clever than just dumping a load of it looks like this and it smells like this.
I mean, it fits her so well. Like the precociousness of having that in your diary fits the character to a T. So the Year of Yes, I keep wanting to do this. I love this cover, by the way.
Isn't it?
I know, it's nice, isn't it? It's a companion novel to A Calamity of Mannerings. So could you tell us about like when you decided to write this as like a companion? And are we going to see more books related to the Mannering family?
Oh, so it has the strangest genesis, really. A Calamity of Mannerings I wrote when we'd just gone into lockdown, because I was supposed to be writing an adult crime novel, and it's just not my thing. It was my agent's idea at the time. So why don't you write something completely different? And I thought about it, and then I just thought, my brain doesn't work like that. It's so, you have to be so mathematically clever to plot a crime novel, and I'm just not that way inclined. And the comfort books that I always turn to are Mitford sisters, are A Diary of a Provincial Lady, Bridget Jones even. And I knew I wanted to write a diary because I find them very easy to write, because they allow me to go off at tangents and talk about random stuff rather than follow strict with plot, which is very...
And it's all character development, you know?
Yes, absolutely. And I knew I wanted to write back. I knew I had to go back in history, because at that moment it felt like the world might end. I didn't know what what a contemporary world would look like. So there was no point writing about the world at that point in time. History was sealed, as it were. You couldn't change it. So that was how Calamity of Mannering started. And it started actually as an adult novel and ended up being bought as a YA novel, and all I had to do was change her age by 1 year in the end. So that was Calamity. And then after that, I was supposed to write an adult literary fiction novel, which was that's my adult strand of writing, having not written a crime novel. And I wrote, it was called All About Eve. It's never been published. And there was a character in there who was a very minor character. She was the mother of the main character. And she was from Surbiton, and she wanted a life that was much, much more glamorous than her boring, dull middle class one. And she ended up getting it by, on New Year's Eve, she meets a Tory MP at a party. But her trajectory is she marries him and ends up moving out to Wiltshire, and it's even duller than the suburbs. And
that's just sad.
It's very sad. But she, in my head, because she was so feisty in the opening, and so I wanted to rescue her, and I wanted to give, while that novel never sold, I wanted to give it a lease of life somehow. And so I was going to just write about Birdy, and that was going to be the novel, Birdy in Soho still. But the more I started researching and thinking of who she would meet, and I just thought, but Val will still be in, Valentine, who owns the theatre, who buys the theatre at the end of Calamity of Mannerings, won't he still be running the Pippin in Soho in 1960? And once I'd thought about that, then it seemed inevitable that other paths would cross. And I knew she was going to end up living in this bookshop with Rollo, and it seemed obvious that Rollo would know Val. And so they all started to come in. And I actually wrote the book without telling my publisher that the Mannerings were in it, because I was worried she would say no. But yes, so that was it was a sort of a sneaky accident that the Mannerings play quite a large role in this, actually. And I thought that was going to be it, but one of my favourite Mannering of all is Marigold, and she's only 6 in A Calamity of Mannerings. And then of course she's an adult here, she's in her 40s in this, and she is just a joy. She's very clearly me as a child. She is very brash, she's obsessed with animals, and she's autistic. And I got my diagnosis about a year ago, and it made me reassess how I'd written Marigold. And it made me, as I looked at Marigold, I was like, oh my goodness, it's so obvious. Yeah. It's so obvious that that's me at that age. And I thought, what would it be like to write a main character actually knowing they're autistic, rather than accidentally writing autistic main characters because I am. So I have written a 3rd Mannering novel, which hasn't even gone to my publisher yet. It's not due till December. So I've written it, I'm sitting on it, and I will read it through again in a few months. And it's the story of Marigold, and she is in her late teens, and I think she's 17, gosh, I can't actually remember. And she is, as I was at that age, obsessed with winning the Grand National. But of course, at that time, you couldn't ride the Grand National as a girl. So this is set in 1934, which is the year of the new Downton Abbey film, just accidentally, not intentional. And it's the story of her wanting to own a horse, wanting to ride a horse, and also discovering sex, basically, in a very Marigold manner.
As one does.
Yes.
All right, so we are going to the 1930s. We've seen the 20s and the 60s. Are there any other historical periods that you're like, I would love to try my hand at that?
You see, yeah, because then having finished that Marigold book, I'm like, how can I write about the action in the war itself? I'd like to write a book set in the 1940s, and Dinah, who was the baby, she might be the right age. So there is part of me that would like to write a wartime novel. But my real obsession is 70s and 80s, because that's my childhood. But I tend to write about that for adults,
rather than for
YA, because it doesn't, even though it is ancient and 40, 50 years ago, it still doesn't quite feel like historical fiction to me. I wonder if that will change, because there's a real 90s revival. And we've seen Rivals on telly, which is the 80s. But in the past, always said to me, no,
Yeah.
1980s for YA, it doesn't work.
Yeah. Well, I think I feel like it's the longer we are away from the 90s, the more likely it's becoming, you know.
Yeah.
Also, we had a comment from Cassie saying, have I missed Joe talking about Daisy Hemmings? I love that book so much.
Thank you.
No,
Well,
you haven't, because we've just been talking about
no.
Birdy, really.
And that is one that is set, half of it is set in the 80s, which was it was an absolute joy. So it's set in the summer of 1988, which was my summer that I turned 18, and the same for one of the characters in the book. So yeah, it was a huge joy to be able to revisit that time.
Lovely. So you've written books for adults, for young adults, and for kids, as we discussed. Like, what is your writing process like? And is it different when you're writing for teens? Like, how does that kind of do you adapt it in some way? Or do you kind of just go, this is the general process, and then it just depends on the characters? Like, we are nosy. Please tell us.
The process is exactly the same for any age, but obviously it's the content and the voice and the tone that is different. So, and I won't go into all the different, because I write for every children's age group, and you start thinking about sentence length and phonics and all of those different sort of things when you're crafting for younger people. But the main difference between YA and adult is YA is written in the middle of it. You're still there. It's written very much for a teen audience and about a teen audience. It doesn't have hindsight. Yeah. So while all my adult novels are written, they're often narrated by teenagers or children. They require the reader to be an adult, to have that, to be looking back in time on something. But the process is, it's very specific. I am a very strict planner. I'm very organized. I need to know, again, this is not a surprise after the discovery of being autistic. I need to know where I'm going at all times. I do not like surprises. I do not like wasted time either. So I spend 2 or 3 months completely planning out a novel. And when I say that, I don't mean sitting in a room with a map. I'm walking around, I'm sitting in cafes, and I'm just imagining the characters, I'm spending time with them, and I'm writing down everything as it comes out of my head in no apparent order at all. Sometimes it's lines of dialogue, sometimes it's something they might wear, sometimes it's a whole scene, a conflict point. And I'll fill up a couple of big A4 notebooks with all of this. It's sort of getting that sort of soup of story that's in your head out onto the page. And it's an absolute mess, but from this mess will have emerged the plot points that I need to get from A to Z. And then in order to sort of shape that into a first draft, I type up the notebooks as they come. I print them out, and then I chop them up into the scenes and the lines of dialogue and the plot points. And then they sit on the floor in my living room, and I arrange them into the right order. And that can take a day of literally moving little bits of paper up and down in several columns as I work out the only obvious order for the story. And then I stick those down on more bits of A4, and that's my draft one done. And I don't feel at that point that I've actually had to write anything. I've made some messy notes, and I've typed up those notes, and then I've blue-peated them into a...
See, you should have the Joanna Nadin like that. I actually really love that, because I feel like everybody has a different process, right? But I feel like very often people have this kind of pressure to do their first draft, and it has to look like a book, and it has to be, but I love that you just basically go, these are all my thoughts, this is how I'm going to order it. Well, there you go, draft one. And that's really that's such a different way of doing it from a lot of people that we talk to a lot of people about, tell us about your writing process, right? So that's really fascinating.
Very, I think because people used to ask me how many drafts, and I'd say I do one. And that's because when I start writing up from my messy first draft chapters, I go chronologically, and all I'm thinking about at that point, because I know where the plot is going, all I'm thinking about is the language I'm using to tell the story. And I'm meticulous, and I'm a trained proofreader, and so I write one draft and then it goes to my editor. And it just sounded like slightly boastful, and also I kept thinking, but I've spent all that time before, so what is that? And then it was a real sort of moment of realization that was quite recent, because I've been using this method for 15 or so years, that actually that folder of stuck down bits of paper and then arrows going here and there,
actual first draft, yeah.
And it's so, I hope it's really helpful, but I have a lot of students who worry about their first draft, and they rewrite the beginning and they rewrite the beginning because it's not perfect. And if I wish I could make them understand that you've just got to, we call it a vomit draft. It should be messy. You've just got to get the shape of the story out, and then you can work with it. It's like you're getting the clay out that you're then going to shape into the beautiful sculpture.
Yeah.
But until you've got that bit of clay, you can't move forward at all. So it's, the quicker you can get out some kind of rough shape of the story, the easier any actual language level writing will be.
Yeah. And Danielle says, I'm so going to print out and chop up my thesis now. Haha. And I was like, do it. All right. So we already talked about, I feel like, did you lose me? No, I'm still here. Sorry. I feel like my internet just went bleep. I'm like, no. So we already mentioned that, you've been using this method for quite a while. So what was your journey to becoming a writer like? And has your approach changed over your career? Because actually I did some research, and you actually then told me that this is your 100th published book, which I think is an amazing achievement and is so exciting. And I feel like everybody should clap now, whoever's watching, whether that's live or later. I mean, like 100 books is amazing. So how has your approach to like storytelling and stories changed over that time?
It's changed massively, because when I started writing a novel, I wasn't trained as a writer. I didn't do a creative writing course. I was a reader. I'd been a bookworm as a child, and I was still a bookworm as an adult. And as I'd sort of mentioned earlier, I became a writer because my life wasn't exciting enough. And so I had this epiphanic moment in Downing Street in the basement, in this life that should have been incredibly glamorous, writing for the Prime Minister, thinking, oh, this is not what it looks like on the West Wing, etc. And so that's when I decided to write a children's book. And at that point I didn't even know there were like guides to how to write anything. I just thought, what did I love to read when I was little? How long is a book? So I literally got, I think, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. And because the internet was still quite rudimentary, there was no way of finding out how long a book was. So I counted every word in that book to work out how long my book should be. And then I had this vague idea that was very much derived from reading a lot of Joan Aiken's funny stories and Roald Dahl as a child. And I just sat down and I gave myself it was written during the summer recess when there's nothing going on in Parliament, while I was still at work. And I gave myself, it sounds mad now, 3 weeks to write the book. And I did. I wrote a 15,000 word draft in 3 weeks, because I was used to writing all day, every day. I'd worked in broadcast news. And I sent it off, physical copies, to every single publisher and every single agent, which is absolutely not what you do. I now know, and I now teach my students that's absolutely not what you do. But I was very lucky in that I got picked up by both an agent and a publisher. That book was not published because it turns out that I'd effectively written the plot of Chicken Run in a slightly different form. So they asked me to go away and write a different book with the same characters in, which I did, and that was published. And I carried on basically doing that method. So every summer recess, when I had holiday, I would write a children's book for the first, so I guess the first couple, maybe 3 books I did that. And then I got pregnant. And then the next book I wrote, the 4th book, I had to write in the last few weeks of pregnancy, in the first couple of months of my daughter's existence. To never do that because it was so bad. My agent, and she turned up at my house, which had absolutely never happened. And she had to sit me down because she was so worried about telling me, given that I just had a baby, that the book was terrible and I needed to completely start again and think about plot properly. And I was quite worried, and also I was very aware of the constraints on my times because now I had a child, and while I had maternity leave, so I'd be going back to work, so I would be back at a almost full-time job with a baby. So I did some research and I found out that there was a book called Story by Robert McKee, who he teaches screenwriting, and I read that and I used that method effectively, and that is the method I now use, which is basically you are making lots and lots of notes. You don't start writing anything until you have got every scene blocked out, and that comes from spending time with your characters and thinking about your characters' wants and needs. And there was a great diagram, which was Act 1 is 25% of your story, Act 2 is 50% of your story, and Act 3 is 25%. And that's very actually my Act 3s tend to be 10% because I rush the endings always. But it was this incredibly helpful method to teach me how to get to a point where I could see a plot, and that I always had this roadmap of where I was going, because I really needed to know that. Otherwise, it's like, there are some amazing novelists who do just sit down with the seed of an idea. Kamala Shamsi is one of them. But to me, that's like getting in my car now and saying, I'm going to drive to Inverness with no map and no sat nav. Let's see if I get there. I don't have the time. I didn't have the time for that anymore. And now, the McKee method gave me the map that I needed. And that is now what I've sort of adapted into my own Peter method, in order to just give me that map so that I'm never lost when I'm writing, because that to me is what writer's block tends to be. Writer's block is 2 things. It's either like having a really bad mental health day, and we all have those, and there is no shame in that, in just thinking I absolutely cannot write today, or it's I don't know where this story's going. I can't write because I don't know what is going to happen next. And when I've got this roadmap, I never have that moment. All I'm worrying about is what word comes next, or what delicious metaphor I use in this sentence. So, or what's my next joke, kind of thing. So that's my method, and it's very much changed because of my big mess up when I was pregnant.
I feel like that's also the kind of the way that you kind of learn how your brain works as a writer, and over time you find things that click. Like it's and I think that's what's so important when anybody's writing, is like, you've got to find what works for you. And so thank you so much for sharing that. That was so interesting. So I'm sure you've had some writing advice in your life. Could you share the best and the worst advice you've ever received?
Oh, I think the worst advice is write what you know, because how boring is that if you just always write what you know? Writing is to write lives that I don't know, that I want to explore, that I want to go out and try new lives for size. So I'm always writing what I don't know, but with sensitivity, and I have authenticity readers because of doing that. And there are certain things that I would never write outside my race. Now that's a definite no. Best writing advice. is my advice is you write every day. It doesn't matter, and I don't mean you have to write a novel every day. Just write something, even if it is a Facebook post, a skeet on Blue Sky. But think about it when you're writing. It's like playing the violin. It's like riding a bicycle. It's muscle memory, and the more you use your writing muscle, the tauter it becomes, the more it becomes. The more you do it, the better you get at it. And I say that as someone who worked in newsrooms for years and years, writing what felt like very dull radio reports and parliamentary questions and things like that. But all of this, I literally wrote for 10 hours a day, every day, thousands and thousands of words. And I learned about beginnings, middles and ends, and I learned how to edit something down so exactly 200 words when it needed it. And even so now, anything I write, I'm very conscious of the words that I'm using.
I feel also like no word is wasted in that sense, isn't it? Because it's all the practice. And I really like how you differentiate saying like every day, like, because I feel like sometimes that's so much pressure, but as you say, any kind of writing, that makes it so much more breathable, you know.
Also, I would say read. Oh my gosh, read. Reading is breathing in, writing is breathing out. You can't write unless you read, and read anything. And I am a very eclectic reader across age band and genre and magazines, and also consume story via film and TV. I think there's a weird snobbery that we should get all our story from books, and I don't believe in that at all. I think film and a lot of my inspiration for what I write is actually from television rather than other books.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. It's all storytelling, isn't it? And I feel like, especially in different types of media, I find it really fascinating to see how storytelling gets translated in different media. So we're kind of coming not to the end, but we're nearing the end. So if you have any questions for Jo at all, feel free to put them and comment them. But we have some more. So has anything in your writing career surprised you? Was there something that you were like, that was very unexpected?
Oh gosh, I mean, so many amazing things have happened to me through becoming a children's writer. And my career started, I think we get used to seeing these big debut authors like Skandar, and you burst onto the scene and you're instantly famous. And I started very small, and my career built up very, very slowly. And so I think I just expected to carry on in that way. And so then to have these amazing things, to be asked to write with Sir Chris Hoy was, I mean, that was just a ridiculous moment. I also nearly turned it down because I just thought, I don't know anything about sport. Why would I want to? In fact, I said to my agent, no, I don't like cycling. He said, no, I think you do.
I think you should do.
And we met, and I was just completely blown away. He's an amazing man, and it was an absolute privilege, and I will treasure that for the rest of my life, that experience. So that has completely surprised me. Writing my first adult novel was a surprise because I never thought I would want to do it or could do it. I'd actually tried 3 times before, and every time I hit the 30,000 word mark, I would have a complete panic, delete the document, delete the notes, throw away all my files. And it was like I had to pretend I'd never even tried because the thought of the failure was too much. So to actually finish an adult novel and for it to be published and to, acclaim was a real surprise as well. And I think to be still writing after I was first published in 2003, because it was a month after my daughter was born, my first book came out. So it's 22 years later to still be writing. That's an amazing thing to me. So it's not so much than 100 is a milestone. I'm so grateful to have a job that I love and to do every day. That's the most surprising thing to me.
And I also think that in the publishing industry, that kind of staying power is quite rare. Like, I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure that there's plenty of people that you debuted with that have not published in ages.
No,
So that's something that's really, really, like, really cool. And so thank you for like being here and sharing with us.
thank you.
Do you have a favorite place to write and a favorite tool to write with? Like, you already kind of explained your that you like to like print things out and blue peter it, so to speak.
Yeah.
But are there any specific places that you really think like you really get into the flow and just feel like you can just write?
I do, and yes, I do, and it's oddly it's cafes. I really struggle in silent. I struggle to write at home because it's one, there's too many distractions. Like I could do the washing or Hoover, but also it's quiet here, and there's like a weird pressure on me to like you must do your work. Whereas if I'm sitting in a cafe, I find the background noise really just I can zone out in it much more easily, and I can't do anything in the cafe except drink tea and write, and so that is my favorite place to write. And I know people really get into notebooks and different notebooks and fancy notebooks, and I am, again showing my autism, I will only ever use a Europa A4 or A5 notepad, depending on what stage I'm at, and a green Pentel pen. And that is what I use when I'm doing all my notes stage. And I get very stressed if my Pentel runs out and I have to resort to a biro and borrow a biro from someone because it feels weird.
Wrong. It's wrong.
I can't write on any other paper. It has to be white, that wide rule, and very smooth. And other than that, I mean, I just write on whatever laptop I have.
Whatever you got
at that moment. Although I will say that they are all Apple because I can't use other laptops. I don't understand how they work. So I'm very lucky that work supply me with with a MacBook Pro.
I feel like this is the thing though, once you kind of go and sometimes you connect everything, that's it then, Apple for life.
Yeah.
And finally, is there a book you wish you'd written? Like, is there a book that you're like, oh, I wish I would have written that, that would have been real cool?
Oh my God, I mean, there's so many books that I admire, and I suppose they are absolutely reflected in that part of my writing is to emulate them. So Diary of a Provincial Lady by E.M. Delafield, I Capture the Castle by Dodie Smith. Both of those have fed into my writing massively. There's also a wonderful, wonderful book called The Lost Art of Keeping Secrets by Eva Rice, and it's published as an adult, but it really should be YA. And it very much inspired Birdy and Charlie's friendship in Birdy Arbuthnot. I mean, I wish I had written any of those novels. But there's, I mean, and then I could go into reams and reams of all the YA novels that I love as well. Yeah.
So many. Well, thank you so much, Joanne. Thank you so much for being here. If you haven't picked up Birdy Arbuthnot's Year of Yes yet, you should. And yeah, thank you for coming to chat around our campfire. We're really happy to have you. And to all of you joining us, thank you. And we will see you at Campfire later this month. Thanks a lot.
Great camp.
Thanks.
Bye.